Have you ever considered that the friendships you once fought so hard to maintain might no longer matter after 70? It sounds shocking, almost unthinkable, because society has always told us that more friends equal more happiness. But what if that belief is wrong? What if the real secret to freedom and fulfillment in your later years isn't about holding on to people but about letting them go? Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you no longer need to prove yourself, no longer need the constant approval of others, no longer feel the weight of social obligations. The very things you once thought were essential, large gatherings, constant conversations, endless circles of friends, suddenly feel unnecessary, even draining. What replaces them is something far more powerful: peace, self-respect, and the ability to live life entirely on your own terms. This isn't loneliness. This is liberation. And once you understand it, you may never look at friendships the same way again. If you find these insights thought-provoking, subscribe now and turn on the bell so we can continue bringing you more eye-opening videos like this. Now let me ask you, which do you believe brings more happiness after 70? A, maintaining a wide circle of friends, or B, embracing independence and inner peace? Comment your answer below. One of the greatest changes that comes with age is the release of the need for social validation. For so much of life, we measure ourselves through the eyes of others. In school, we want approval from classmates. In our careers, we strive to impress colleagues and supervisors. Even friendships in our younger decades often carry an invisible weight. We want to be liked, admired, and included. Many of our social ties are built not on authenticity, but on the subtle pressure to belong. Yet as you move into your 70s, that weight begins to fall away. You realize you no longer have to prove anything. You no longer have to shape yourself to meet the expectations of others. The approval you once chased has lost its power, and in its place grows something far more enduring: self-respect. Harold's story illustrates this truth clearly. He had built an entire career surrounded by people, moving in busy circles filled with conversation, meetings, and networking. On the surface, it seemed as though he had a wide and loyal circle of friends. But when retirement arrived, those friendships dissolved almost overnight. Calls stopped, invitations disappeared, and the lively social life he once thought was real revealed itself to be little more than convenience. At first, Harold felt uneasy. He wondered if he should be reaching out, keeping these ties alive, holding on to the people who had defined so much of his working years. But slowly he realized something. Those relationships had never been built on genuine care. They were tied to circumstance, not to his soul. Once the circumstance ended, the connection did too. Instead of clinging, Harold let go. What followed was not loss, but liberation. This is the hidden gift of aging. When you no longer need validation, you begin to see how much energy was wasted chasing it. Think of the endless gatherings attended only out of fear of missing out, the small talk carried out to avoid judgment, the favors given in hopes of being appreciated. Each of these moments may have seemed harmless, but together they took a toll. They drained hours, days, even years from a life that could have been lived with greater authenticity. By 70, the illusion fades. You see clearly that worth was never given by others. It was always something you carried within yourself. True freedom begins when you no longer ask, "Do they approve of me?" but instead ask, "Do I approve of myself?" That shift transforms the way you view friendship. A friend is no longer someone who elevates your status, introduces you to opportunities, or helps you feel included. A real friend at this stage is someone in whose presence you can simply be. No pressure to perform, no need to impress, no expectation to prove. If you are lucky enough to have even one such person, you know their worth. If you do not, then you learn an even deeper lesson, that your own companionship is enough. Letting go of validation is not about bitterness or rejection. It is about authenticity. It allows you to live without masks, to speak without fear, to choose without hesitation. It frees you from the invisible chains of comparison and gives you back the power to define your own value. By the time you reach 70, you have walked through decades of victories and failures, joys and regrets. None of those experiences require anyone else's approval to be real. They belong to you, and they make you enough. Once you accept that, you no longer chase friendships that serve only your image. You live for yourself, and in doing so, you finally discover peace. As the years advance and the noise of earlier decades begins to quiet, something extraordinary emerges: the recognition that peace is worth more than social activity. In youth and middle age, we are taught to seek company, to fill our calendars, to attend every gathering as though presence itself is proof of life well lived. Yet with age comes a new sensitivity, a deeper awareness that not all forms of connection nourish us. Sometimes the very relationships we cling to can drain the energy we need most. Choosing peace over pressure becomes not only a preference, but a form of survival for the spirit. Think of Margaret, who once carried a calendar so full it barely left her time to breathe. Lunches with old friends, weekly phone calls, yearly holiday trips, it looked like abundance from the outside. But as the years went on, she began to notice how these encounters made her feel afterward. Instead of leaving refreshed, she often left exhausted. Conversations became repetitive, circling the same stories told 100 times before. Some friends seemed to thrive on gossip, others on complaints, and few offered the warmth of true understanding. Margaret realized that her time was being spent not on joy, but on obligation. And so one day, she began saying no. She declined invitations that no longer sparked excitement. She stopped apologizing for unanswered calls, and she chose instead the company of silence. Far from making her lonely, the quiet restored her. She took long walks in nature, returned to books she had postponed for years, and learned to sit with herself without unease. For the first time in decades, her days belonged entirely to her. This shift is not unique to Margaret. Many people in their later years discover that peace offers a kind of fulfillment that socializing often cannot. There is a misconception that silence is empty, that solitude is something to fear. In reality, silence is often the only space where we can hear our own thoughts clearly, free from the static of others' demands. Solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of clarity. When you are no longer bound by the responsibility to constantly show up for others, you finally show up for yourself. It is not that friendships are inherently negative, but they come with costs, small, unspoken debts that accumulate with every call returned out of guilt, every visit accepted out of duty, every hour spent in conversations that no longer add meaning. These costs may have felt manageable in earlier years when energy seemed unlimited, but later in life, energy is sacred. To spend it carelessly is to rob yourself of the serenity you have earned. Choosing peace is not withdrawal from life, it is refinement. It is the conscious decision to eliminate the noise so that what remains is pure and valuable. And yet, peace does not mean complete isolation. There is still room for connection, but it is chosen carefully, deliberately, and without pressure. The people who remain in your circle are those who understand the value of silence, who do not demand performance, who bring calm rather than chaos. A single conversation that uplifts is worth more than a dozen that exhaust. A moment of quiet companionship, where no words are needed, can sometimes bring more comfort than hours of chatter. As you reach this stage of life, peace becomes a gift you can no longer afford to trade away. Every choice to say no to unnecessary obligations is a choice to say yes to yourself. Every step away from noise is a step toward a deeper kind of joy. And in that joy, you will find not only rest but renewal. It is here, in the stillness, that life reveals its richness, not in the endless rush of company, but in the freedom of calm. As the years unfold, there comes a moment when time itself becomes the most precious currency. Unlike money, it cannot be earned back. Unlike possessions, it cannot be replaced. In earlier decades of life, it often felt infinite. There was always another day, another weekend, another year to spend as we pleased. That illusion of endless time made it easy to waste hours in conversations that led nowhere, in obligations that drained more than they gave, in maintaining connections simply because they had always been there. But once you reach your 70s, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every moment carries weight. Every hour you give away is an hour you will never reclaim. This realization changes how you view relationships. Suddenly, the question is not, how many friends do I have? But do the people around me add value to the limited time I still have? William, at 78, came to this understanding after years of carrying one-sided friendships. He had always been the one to call first, to arrange the meetings, to hold the conversations together. For decades, he believed it was his responsibility to keep those ties alive. But as he aged, the imbalance grew heavier. He noticed how rarely anyone reached out to him on their own, how little effort others made to maintain the bond. At first, he wondered if something was wrong with him, if he had failed in some way. But then he realized the truth. The friendships had stopped serving both sides long ago. The moment he stopped pouring his time into those who gave nothing back, he found space opening for himself. What once felt like rejection became clarity. He no longer needed to waste his most valuable resource on relationships that were already empty. Richard, in his early 80s, had a similar revelation. He had built his later years around social gatherings, dinners, group outings, reunions, believing that staying busy with others was the key to staying alive. But as he sat through endless evenings of small talk and complaints, he began to feel the subtle erosion of joy. The very events that once seemed essential now felt like burdens, consuming time he could no longer afford to squander. One day, he made a quiet decision. He began to say no. No to dinners where he left more tired than when he arrived. No to conversations that circled the same unchanging stories. No to obligations that pulled him away from what mattered most. In their place, he gave himself yes to mornings spent reading, to afternoons learning something new, to walks where the silence felt more nourishing than the loudest party. What surprised him most was that he did not feel lonely. On the contrary, he felt more fulfilled than ever, because he was finally using his time in alignment with his own heart. This is the essence of the lesson. When you understand the true value of time, you become selective. You begin to weigh every relationship, every commitment, against the measure of your limited days. You realize that some friendships persist only out of habit, that some conversations exist only to fill silence, and that some ties remain only because you are afraid to let them go. But fear is no longer a good enough reason to trade away your hours. Instead, you choose with intention. You invest in the people who bring you peace rather than unrest, joy rather than exhaustion, growth rather than stagnation. And if that list is short, it does not matter, because the return is immeasurable. By 70, you have earned the right to guard your time fiercely. It is not selfish to protect it, it is wise. Every no to a draining friendship is a yes to yourself. Every choice to spend an afternoon in solitude rather than in obligation is a declaration of freedom. In protecting your hours, you protect your spirit. You remind yourself that life is not measured by the number of people around you, but by the quality of the moments you create for yourself. Time is too precious to be wasted, and once you recognize this truth, your life begins to shift from being full to being truly fulfilled. The most liberating discovery after 70 is that true companionship does not come from the number of people in your life, but from the depth of the relationship you hold with yourself. For decades, the world teaches us that happiness is something built externally, measured by how many friends we keep, how often our phone rings, how many invitations we receive. Loneliness is treated as a danger to be avoided at all costs, as if being alone must automatically mean being unhappy. But in later life, you begin to see through that illusion. You realize there is a profound difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone is a state of presence with yourself. Loneliness is the absence of connection within. When you learn to cultivate the first, the second no longer has power over you. Eleanor, at 76, lived much of her life under the belief that constant social activity was the only shield against loneliness. She filled her days with plans, checking in on friends, attending events, and keeping conversations alive, even when she was tired. Yet, despite being surrounded by people, she often went to bed feeling empty. It was only when she paused long enough to listen to herself that she realized the truth. She had been neglecting the most important relationship of all, the one with her own heart and mind. So she made a quiet but transformative choice. She began treating herself as if she were her own closest companion. She went for walks without feeling the need to call anyone. She took herself to cafes with a book in hand, allowing the quiet to wrap around her like a friend. She allowed evenings of reflection rather than rushing to fill them with company. In time, she found that the emptiness she once feared was replaced by a fullness she had never known. She no longer sought external distractions because she discovered that her own presence was enough. James, in his late 70s, found a similar truth when he stopped forcing friendships that had long since lost meaning. For years, he had clung to ties out of duty, showing up for conversations and gatherings that drained him more than they enriched him. One day, he simply let go. What followed was not isolation, but renewal. Freed from the pressure of keeping others satisfied, he discovered the quiet joy of rediscovering himself. He spent more time outdoors, focused on his health, and embraced learning with the curiosity of a child. In the space left by fading friendships, he found growth, energy, and peace. The beauty of this stage of life is that once you stop looking outward for validation and connection, you begin to uncover the endless resources already within you. The mind becomes a companion filled with wisdom from decades of experience. The body, though older, becomes a partner in resilience and survival. The spirit, often neglected in earlier years, emerges with clarity and strength. This companionship is not conditional, not fragile, not dependent on the whims of others. It is yours, unshakable, and always present. When you embrace this truth, the way you view relationships changes. You stop chasing people out of fear of being alone. Instead, the right people naturally enter your life, the ones who understand your need for space, who bring calm instead of pressure, who respect rather than demand. These relationships feel effortless because they are built not on need, but on choice. They become an extension of the companionship you already have with yourself, not a replacement for it. This is the lesson many never learn until it is too late, that the richest relationship you will ever know is the one you nurture with yourself. Once you realize that you are enough, loneliness loses its grip. The quiet no longer frightens you. It heals you. It teaches you that fulfillment does not depend on a crowded room, but on the peace that comes from within. After 70, this is the greatest gift you can give yourself: the freedom to be your own best friend, the strength to find joy in solitude, and the wisdom to understand that you were never truly alone at all.